Hey everyone, how are you? I am super happy to have you all here today. Welcome back to Too Ambitious. I am Trish Lindo. If you didn't already know that, you probably did because you're here on my page watching, and you're probably watching as well on Monica Marquez page as well. That's because she's our guest today. So if this is your first time watching this show, this is a live series that celebrates Black women and women of color entrepreneurs who are changing the game. They are resilient, they are talented, they're innovative, and of course, very, very ambitious. So without further ado, I want to welcome my very first guest today, Monica Marquez. Now, Monica is a co-founder and Chief Learning Officer of Beyond Barriers. She is a pioneer who's created industry-leading programs that have propelled those from marginalized groups to go further faster. She has led diversity, equity, inclusion at various Fortune 500 companies such as Google, Ernst & Young, and Goldman Sachs. So give her a warm welcome on Too Ambitious. I want to see those emojis. I want to show all the love. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Too Ambitious, Monica.
Hi, thank you for having me, Trish.
Hey,
Love being here.
absolutely. I'm so happy you're here, Monica. How are you doing today? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great, doing well, just keeping busy. I mean, it's always one of those situations where you love what you're doing, so work just feels great.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And let me just ask the audience, please tell us where everyone is joining us from. I'm in the
Yeah.
Bay Area. Monica, where are you joining
New
us
York
from today?
City, so we got the two
Hey,
coasts covered.
hey, the West Coast, East Coast,
Yes.
no battles though, no
No, no,
battles.
no.
It's all love. It's all love. So be sure to let us know where you all are joining us from. We are super happy that you're here to have this conversation with us. Monica, I have known you for a couple of years now,
Yes.
and you've always been so kind and extraordinary. So I want to just set the stage for that and let everybody know that you are everything. Okay. So
Oh, you are too kind, Trish. But you know what? It's like-minded people, so we're drawn to like-minded people.
absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for that.
Mhm.
Now, let's get into it. Now, Monica, you call yourself MacGyver for the marginalized.
Yes.
How did you come up with that name and why? Because a lot of people may not know that reference, right? So, how did
Yes.
you come up with it?
So, MacGyver for the marginalized, that is my moniker. And as you know, Trish, one of the things that we teach our Beyonders in our Beyond Barriers program is that we always want to distinguish ourselves and really want to be able to articulate our unique value proposition for people. But sometimes that's hard to do, right? To go
Yeah.
into, here's what I do, these are my strengths. And so monikers are really powerful. And so this was several years ago. I remember the very first time I was working with a coach, and they were like, you need to distinguish yourself. Do you have a moniker? And I'm like, what is that? And it felt really hokey at first, right? And
Yeah.
because I've spent the better part of 25 years in, diversity, equity, and inclusion in various different roles and leadership development roles and recruiting roles and things like that, I was always focused on marginalized groups, BIPOC professionals. How do you help them go further faster? What are
Mhm.
ways that programmings or ways or opportunities that you can help them go further faster? And so, of
Mhm.
course, when I was thinking up of a moniker, monikers are things that kind of evolve. And so first it was
Yeah,
like, am I the diva for diversity? Like all of these things. And then
I
finally
love it.
there was a situation where we were in a pinch and like a crisis moment. And then I came in and I said, let's do this, do that. And we can easily use this for that instead. And my friends were like, you're MacGyver, and I'm probably dating myself, right? Because
Mm.
MacGyver was this TV series back in the late 80s, early 90s of this person, doesn't matter where they were. They could be like in a jungle in the Amazon. And if they had a paper clip and some duct tape, they
Mhm.
could like come make a car run or something, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so friends were like, you're MacGyver. And then it was like, that's, I had to listen to that. I'm like, okay, people come to me in those crisis moments, and I'm like, okay, let me own the name MacGyver. And then it was like MacGyver for the marginalized. It kind of like, listen, I find very creative ways to help marginalized groups become more successful, find opportunities, like break through those systemic barriers and things. And so it kind of stuck, and I loved it, and it was a really easy way for me to distinguish myself from a crowd of amazing other professionals in my line of work, where when I
Yeah,
sat on panels and we were all, saying, "Hi, my name is Monica. I'm, chief diversity officer or chief learning officer," and everybody had the same title, I could say,
right.
"This is Monica. I'm this title, but my friends and colleagues call me the MacGyver for the marginalized," and it was immediately kind of distinguishing. So I live and breathe and tell everybody they should have their own monikers, and really, kind of like help people understand what they do. And it's kind of that fun coffee table talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for explaining that. And I
Yeah.
do believe they did like a reboot of MacGyver, like either like a
Yes,
show or a
they
movie.
did. They did
Yeah,
recently.
okay. Because I was like, it sounds like they just did it recently, not
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
at least within the last 5 years or something
yeah.
like
They
that,
did. They
so
did.
yeah, well, that's great. Well, I have to come up with my own moniker. I'm still working on it, but I'm always inspired, especially when I see your title, because it's amazing. And you're right, it does set you apart from everybody else,
Yes.
It's
Well,
pretty
Trish, we'll have to
awesome.
take it offline and work together and come up with your moniker.
Yes, yes, we'll workshop it. We'll
Yes.
let everybody know what we come up with,
Yes. I love it.
So Monica, you're from Texas as
Yes.
well,
Mhm.
right? Even though you are in New York, you are still a Texan, born and raised.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, how did growing up in Texas and in your family sort of inspire you to be who you are now? What did you learn from those formative years in Texas? You know?
Yeah, well, everything's bigger in Texas, right? So,
Hey.
so it's just like, and so it was one of those things where, when you dream, dream big. And, I think I loved growing up in Texas. I come from a very traditional Mexican American family, from West
Mhm.
Texas. My family's still in Odessa, Texas, and Alpine, Texas.
Mhm.
And I, can say that I was, I grew up in a Texas where there is that Texas, like everything is bigger in Texas, but also that people have really big hearts in Texas. I mean, it gets a bad name. Yes. When you start thinking some like things that are going on in Texas, but there's some real hospitality and real kind of like genuine people there. So I grew up around a lot of supportive individuals and people, but my family, most importantly.
Mhm.
But one thing that my family always instilled in me is that, I was meant for bigger things, and that, I needed to dream big. And that meant, leaving the big state of Texas. And so education was something that was always kind of like, it stressed that, education will help you change things, not just for yourself, but for others and for the family and for our generations and whatnot. So I learned in Texas, one, how to the grit, like West Texas, Permian Basin. I grew up around like the oil fields where people, worked really hard, the work ethic, sun up, sun down kind of things. And so there are lots of wonderful characteristics and, just values that I brought with me. But after, college, after my master's degree, it was like, how can I expand my horizons? Because I did realize, even going to college, how sheltered of a life that I lived, and
Mhm.
really wanted to expand those horizons and broaden my frame of reference. And so packed up my bags, moved to New York City, and had that song, the phrase in my head, Frank Sinatra, "If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere." So
Yes.
in 2000, I packed up my bags, I moved to New York City, and never looked back. And I thought it would just be for a couple of years,
Yeah.
to get some experience and then go back to Texas. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with just the diversity and all of the, just the melting pot of cultures and everything that I was learning and getting exposed to. And
Right.
I've been here ever since. And so I
Wow.
did have a short stint on the West Coast, when, following work, when I was working with Ernst & Young and Google. But
Mhm.
I really felt like the center of gravity for me was back in New York City. And so, but true and true, you can take the girl out of Texas, but you can't take the Texas out of the girl. So there's
Yes.
still, it's still a very dear place to go home and visit family and whatnot. But ironically, as big as Texas is, I find myself yearning after a few days to get back to just all of the energy and activity in New York City. So
Yeah.
I think I'm a definitely now more of a native New Yorker, but I still have the Texas in me.
I love that. It's a great combo,
Yeah, absolutely.
so and obviously it has served you well, so,
Oh, thank
kudos to you on that. Um, you know, and you've mentioned that you've worked for these incredible companies,
Yes.
Google, Ernst and Young, Goldman Sachs. By most standards, people would say, hey, that's pretty successful, to be able to work for such powerful companies, and to thrive at those companies as well. So, when did you decide to become an entrepreneur, and
Mm,
why did you? Because you
yeah.
could have easily kept going on the corporate track, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I worked at some amazing organizations that I learned so much from. And I cut my teeth in corporate, at Goldman Sachs. I mean, when I first came to New York, I was working in academia, so I was at NYU. And then I, had an opportunity to, go work at Goldman Sachs. And I'll be honest, I was very naive at first. I was,
Mm.
the old movie Wolf of Wall Street and all of that. And I'm like, why do I want to work there? It seems so cutthroat. But I met a lot of really interesting and amazing people during that whole, interview process. And so at the end, I was like, well, let me try this. And I actually fell in love with it. And there were certainly lots of growing pains. And I
Yeah.
realized really quickly that's where I would say the very first time I started to experience severe bouts of imposter syndrome, because I was
Mhm.
gracing the halls of Goldman Sachs surrounded by people with Ivy League degrees. And I just felt like, what am I doing here? This young Latina from West Texas who went to a state school in Texas. I don't know how to be. Um,
Right.
and that is when I really started realizing that a lot of the cultural values that I had in terms of really good, amazing values of work ethic, put your head down, work really hard, and all of those things were good, but they were also clashing with the corporate values of just that, individualism, competition, self promotion, like all of these things. So I had
Mhm.
to relearn a lot of things that I realized all of the values, cultural values I still want to hold on to and I believe, but there's a line in the sand where they become unresourceful in a place. And so that is the first time I started realizing I needed to acculturate to the culture of the organization and become quote unquote bicultural, not lose
Yeah.
myself, but start
Right.
to understand what does success look like in these organizations and be able to adapt in that way, but not so much that I lost who I was. And so
Mhm.
it was amazing. I had an amazing experience at Goldman. From Goldman, went on to, do other jobs where I went to Bank of America, heading up
Mhm.
leadership development, and then to Ernst and Young, where I was heading up DEI for the West Coast, and then ultimately went to Google, where I had, friends and colleagues who had kind of recruited me there and loved what I was doing. But there
Mhm.
was always that bug of me wanting to have more impact, more
Right.
influence. And,
Yeah.
everywhere I went, really great work, but I was confined to the four walls of that organization. And it was like more people need the type of, access to the unwritten rules that even I didn't know about, that I had to learn the hard way. Right. And if I knew those
Yeah.
things early on, how much further could I have gone? And
Right.
so there was a moment, there was a pivotal moment where I was getting really frustrated and not being able to scale the type of programs I wanted in within an organization that,
Wow.
my wife, Nikki, who's a successful serial
Mhm.
entrepreneur, was like, you're just gonna
Hey,
have to build
Nikki.
what you want. Yeah. Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
Nikki.
Hey, Nikki.
But she was the one who kind of planted that bug and was like, planted the seed and saying, if you can't find what you want and need in an organization, then you're going to need to build it, because obviously there's a pain point and there's a need for it. And so there was one day I came home and I was like, all right, like I want to do this. And she had already started thinking about her next venture and had already kind of laid the groundwork
Mhm.
for that. And so
Right.
I kind of started moonlighting a little bit, and then at the end it was like, all right, let me join you full time. So we launched Beyond Barriers, and it has grown into what it is now, which is so fulfilling and amazing. All the individuals that we've been able to touch and really help see them kind of like really kind of scale into and become really what they're hoping to become, and teaching them all of the things of how do you navigate that corporate culture, and really how do
Mhm.
you identify your unique value proposition and thrive.
I love it. I love it. And that's such a great story, because there's not a direct line to
Right.
how you get to grow your own business or start your own business. Everyone has a different story. And I love that, when you talk about Beyond Barriers, tell me how you all came up with the name. I think I have an idea, but tell me
Mhm.
how you came up with the name and how it sort of has driven the work that you all have been doing within
Yeah.
this organization.
Yeah, I think, it really goes back to, Nikki and I, right? Nikki actually wrote a book called Beyond Barriers, which was the genesis of her telling her story. And she has an amazing story herself. And I admire her so much in the, just her tenacity and the grit of an immigrant coming to the US with, very little in her pocket, big dreams, and really, coming by herself, having no other family here, but knowing that the whole American dream, and her becoming as successful as she did. And so there were many barriers throughout her life and career that she had to overcome. And then I had a similar story, right? First generation, college, first generation corporate, coming from a small town, West Texas, being a Latina, the only daughter, and I have two younger brothers, but I was the oldest and only daughter. And so it was very, I definitely went against the grain of most of, Latinas, oldest Latinas who usually stay home, very nurturing, or stay close to home.
Mhm.
And I, broke out of that. I wanted to do bigger and better things. And so I think, when Nikki was writing her book and we were coming up with, she was kind of throwing titles around, Beyond Barriers just really suited her, but it also resonated with me. And we had kind of some shared kind of parallel stories of like the barriers that we had to face as, young brown women kind of making a name for themselves, throughout their career. And so, yeah, so Beyond Bears was something that really resonated. And to be quite honest, when we launched, the company as well, we thought about like, what other names, and that one just really, it resonated. It said everything in that title of like, not a lot of, you don't have to question of like, what are we about? We help people go beyond barriers. And so it was just something that we held on to, and we live it, we breathe it. We still continue to run into barriers, but we now have that mindset of, all of these obstacles, we turn them into opportunities. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the story beyond barriers.
I love it. I love it. And congratulations. It's become, quite a success. Describe a little bit about Beyond Barriers for someone who doesn't know much about it. Describe what the business is all about. And also too, if you can share a little bit about, how you both go about scaling the business,
Mhm.
go from there.
Yeah, certainly. So beyond barriers, I guess the best way you can describe it is that, we help companies, organizations, leaders get the most out of their team, right? And so everybody has, potential, but you really have to truly get to know those individuals and understand what is, each of their unique value propositions, and really leverage them in that way. Um, but the battle is that sometimes individuals have to do a lot of the self-reflection work themselves to understand what is my unique value proposition. And
Yeah.
so we really kind of work with organizations to take individuals through a career journey. And it doesn't end there, right? So we love to call our platform, our app it's more like a career fitness app, right? In the same way that you would leverage a fitness app like Peloton or Fitness Pal or any of those things, it's constant maintenance. Like you never stop. And the same thing with your career. You have to be intentional about your career, and constantly be thinking about how am I going to level up? Who are the people that I need to know? Who are the people I need to surround myself? Who's going to challenge me to grow? All of those things. And so in a nutshell, that's what we do is we, pull the most potential, like, the utmost potential out of each individual. So we work with companies, leaders, and others to, help them do that. In terms of the business and scaling, one of the things we realized is that, a lot of professional development, leadership development can be very analog. It can be very lean back experience. And, with my background in learning and development, leadership development, just overall learning theories, we were trying to figure out a way, how do you scale it and democratize access to people? Because I myself worked in organizations where we had finite budget, finite bandwidth, but we had thousands and thousands of professionals that we needed to help upskill. But not everybody had access to those programs. It was, a finite level. You had to be selective. And by being selective, of course, you're creating insider, outsider. And what most organizations, there was the broken middle where you have people that when you enter an organization right out of campus, there's a lot of hand holding, let's train you, everything. A couple of years later, it's like, okay, you're on your own. And then
Right.
fast forward, 10 years or so, it's like, oh, well, the people who've made it, who are high performers at, 10 years later, let's now continue to develop them into our next level of leaders. But you have
Mhm.
so much drop off in the middle of there's,
Yeah.
if there was just something to help, that pipeline of diverse individuals or just people in general, where you have the attrition, if you teach them the rules of the road early on, maybe you have more of that diversity making it through the pipelines. And so
Absolutely.
that was the goal of how do we do that? And so honestly, I'm more of the academic nerd, kind of the science behind learning and all of that. And then Nikki is, Nikki and our other founders are the ones thinking about business and from a how do you scale it? How do you do that? And so, Nikki, Brooke, Laura, our co-founders, we each have our unique kind of strengths and skill sets that are helping us like come together and figure out how do we scale this and democratize access to as many people as possible. So working with organizations to really target that mid-career individual.
Right.
But what we have found fascinating is that our programming is actually it resonates from campus to the C-suite. And so,
Mm.
we've had pilots in different areas, but at the end of the day, what we tell them, it's not rocket science, but we present it in a way that's very step by step to help people start to realize these are the things I need to do to maintain a level of career momentum that'll help us keep going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've just full disclosure for everyone watching. I actually took the Beyond Barriers, course as well. I think it was like 3 months.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And, yeah, it's phenomenal, and I would say one of the biggest takeaways for me was that, it did help me with my confidence,
mhm.
because I had those tools and, you know, it's one of those things where you think you have it all sort of figured out. You're like, yeah, I know how to sort of navigate, this whole
Mhm,
thing, but then you're like, oh, okay. All the tools that, you were teaching and sharing within the Beyond Barriers, platform have completely resonated with me and has changed how I go about doing business, how I show up as well.
mhm.
So first of all, thank you for that. you
Oh,
know and I can only imagine that there's so many others who are out there who feel the same way, because the confidence piece is key, especially when you're a woman in corporate and you are
mhm.
from a marginalized community. Sometimes you just don't get that support.
Yeah.
So thank you for what you all have built.
Oh, well, thank you, Trish. But, thank you for investing in yourself and gifting yourself the time you needed to really discover all of those things, right? And I think that's the hard part is to, for people to start realizing that you are worth it. You need to invest in yourself and you need to do the work so that you can then get out of your own way, right? Because there are a lot of things that you start to realize that we ourselves have those self-limiting beliefs and needing to understand what is at the core,
Yeah,
but then understanding, how do the most successful people deal with those same, limiting beliefs? Because we all have them, right? The
right,
research is starting to show that, one, we, we hear about the imposter syndrome, but it's not just a gender, like a female only thing.
right.
80% of the population deal with it. It's really ambitious people
Yeah,
that do it. And we had a podcast a couple weeks ago that our guest had an amazing quote where she said, the highest achievers or the highest performers receive feedback the hardest, but they're the fastest to come back. And
mhm,
for me that struck a chord because it was one of those things where sometimes that imposter syndrome of you want to be excellent, you want to be perfect, but then
yeah,
sometimes you get in your own way and trip up and the confidence goes away.
Yeah.
And so it's all about learning more about yourself and shifting that mindset. And then taking all the technical skills and things that you're learning and amassing throughout your career. But then
Yeah.
how do you move forward despite any uncertainty with confidence, right? And
Yeah.
so that's part of it. A lot of it is definitely mindset, but it's also the work, like you dedicating and being accountable to yourself.
Yeah.
And so you proved to be a star pupil, and that you got a lot out of it because you put a lot into it.
Well, thank you, Monica. You hear that, everyone? I'm a star pupil. So, if someone is listening right now and they want to learn more about Beyond Barriers and they want to, take that first step in, kind of basically taking care of their careers and how they can level up, what should they be doing? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is to assess, right? You've got to do an inventory on and really understand, what do you really want? It
Mhm.
starts with clarity, right? And I think for me, one of the things that did fuel us figuring out, like, how do we help people learn these things, because there was a study that was done in 2019, so it's not too old, but there was a study that they did where they identified 9600 people to say, do you know where you want to be in the next 5 years in
Mhm.
your career? And, surprisingly, around 60% of the men they asked knew, but still there's 40% who had no idea where they wanted to be in 4 years,
Mhm.
in 5 years. And then for women, that number was 15%. Only 15% knew where they wanted to be
Mhm.
in 5 years. And so
Wow.
for me, I was like, well, if you don't know where you want to go, how are you going to get there? And
Yeah.
so really understanding that we have to be intentional on driving our career, and
Mhm.
understanding that it's not your manager's job or the organization's job to help you, like, help put you on a promotion path. It's like you have to be intentional. And
Mhm.
so when you think about career, you have to really start thinking about, you have two jobs. You have your day job and making sure that you're doing what you were hired to do, but you have
Right.
another job of navigating your career. And so I
Absolutely.
would say, start thinking about, where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And start
Mhm.
identifying who has the success or the title or the job that you want. And how do
Mhm.
you start studying them and understanding how they got there? And all of those kind of things. And so I think it's that first, that self-assessment, really understanding, what do I need to start doing?
Mhm.
We have a proprietary kind of momentum metric assessment that
Mhm.
we created that really can help you start pinpointing, what are the things you need to start working on so that you can get ahead and start moving ahead. And it's free,
Yeah.
so you can go to our website and take it. But
Yeah.
if you want to start, that's where you should start. And it's doing that self inventory on, where do you want to go? Who do you want to be? And then really start thinking about, what is the path to get there? And that sometimes can be the scariest, right? When you're like, well, I don't know what I don't know, but it's just going to take a little bit of that self reflection and you starting to take initiative on driving your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And that website is gobeyondbarriers.com slash momentum metric. I have it on the screen there. If you want to take that assessment, it's totally free, but it does give you some clarity, which I think we can all agree is helpful when you're trying to decide the next step in your career and life. So
Yes,
so
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. So, my last question to you, Monica, is how do you think about ambition? Is
Mhm.
there such a thing as being too ambitious? Um,
Yeah, that's a good one. And my answer is no. I think some people, this is where sometimes we get into this, like, it's all subjective of, like, you're being too ambitious, you're, too much ambition. But I think ambition is good. It's that internal intrinsic motivation, that drive that's going to propel you forward.
yeah,
And at the end of the day, we have to, assess, how are you going to keep fueling that, right? And so
yeah,
ambition can, when it's kind of put in this idea of, like, oh, you're showing too much ambition, I say challenge that, because really
yeah,
what it comes down to is these unconscious biases of, who's supposed to be
mhm,
ambitious and who's not, right? And
yeah,
sometimes there's societal norms that are, can be somewhat antiquated, where, like, maybe men need to be more ambitious than women and this and that. And so I've always been of the mind of, like, just be mindful of, like, when you're telling someone you can't be too ambitious or you're too ambitious, don't don't quash that ambition, because that is really what's that's driving that internal, that internal motivation. And so I think it's relative to who you're
Absolutely.
talking to. And I think at the end of the day, it's like the idea of trying to fit people in certain boxes, and who's supposed to be ambitious and who's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think, it draws that fine line of like being your authentic self. And if there's that drive and you just have that fire burning in your belly, don't let anybody put that fire out. And maybe sometimes you need to channel it and figure out like where you're going to channel all that ambition. But just there's a little bit of that calibration of like, I have tons of ambition, but once you start gaining clarity on where you want to be and where you want to go, then use that to fuel you forward. But when you start hearing the noise of you're too ambitious, you're too loud, you're too, you're too this, you're too that, take it for what it is. You can address it if you feel the need to, but sometimes it's like, where do you want that energy to go? So wherever, it's just like that focus, wherever you focus, just let that energy flow in that way. So short answer, no, more
Yeah.
ambition, bring it on, channel it in the right ways, and let it drive you where you
Absolutely.
want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as women and women of color. Yeah, there's no such thing as being too ambitious. And I completely agree is to use that energy to fuel you. And it's like Renee Lindo, no relation, says it keeps you going. It
It
keeps you
does. It
going,
keeps you
you
going.
know.
It's what's going
It
to
keeps you
fuel you.
going.
And so
Mhm.
don't let anybody damper it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Monica, for being here today. You dropped some really great gems, you know,
Well,
so
thank you,
thank you
Trish.
for your time, you
Well, I
know.
appreciate the
And
platform, and you
thank
keep that
you.
ambition flowing. And I love your Two Ambitious series. These are fun, they're informative, and you're creating visibility, right? Because for all of those young, ambitious professionals out there, if they can't see it, they can't be it. And you're doing your part in shining light on that for thousands.
Yo, thank you so much, Monica. I appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today on Too Ambitious. We'll be back next week with another extraordinary founder and CEO. And so I will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.